We've worked hard with our 140-odd members to come up with a manifesto. I've got a copy of it here, unfortunately only one, but feel free to come and grab me and have a look at it. 10-point plan for climate, for nature, and for the UK's role in the world as part of our role beyond our own borders. And we need to see backbench MPs speaking out. And there's some good constituencies of backbench MPs who are through the Conservative Environment Network and others. But we need to see an awful lot more happening extremely quickly. So, Great Big Green Week, excuse me, which we ran for the first time last year, was designed very carefully to reach out beyond the British public who tend to engage in issues around climate and nature. And it's been really successful. One of my favourite things that's happening this week is the National Trust actually have taken over a pub. They've called it the Green Man Pub. And in that pub, in a village in Wiltshire, there will be climate scientists behind the bar, pulling the pints and talking to the public. There's all sorts of things that we're trying to do just to think about really, really differently how we engage the UK public on such critical issues at such critical times. We are aware of, and we think there are more, 152 Green Weeks happening around the UK right now, and over 2,500 events. Last year there were 7,000 events. We think as we collate them, that's probably more like the numbers they're going to be. And I just want to use this sort of public platform to praise my team who organised Great Big Green Week. It's a small team, there's 10 of us, who have been working so hard all year to prepare for this. We're delighted that there are dozens of MPs who are attending events this week across the country, delighted that we have representatives from Norwich City Council here. Alan, the leader of the council, is here, which is fantastic, and I know other members of the council will come. And these are the sorts of things that we need to keep doing and keep talking to people and keep pushing for action urgently. So that's all I'm going to say. The format for the afternoon is we've got a number of fantastic speakers, and in a moment I will invite Asha to come and join us. You're very free, obviously it goes without saying, to come and go, but lovely if you can stay for much of the afternoon. If you do need a toilet break, the nearest toilets are at the forum, just behind where you're sat. If you would like a hot drink, there are hot drinks at the back, and if you would like to leave a small donation for Peter Mancroft, please do, but absolutely not compulsory. And finally, we do have, there's some QR codes dotted around if you've got the technology. If not, there's a little URL for a participant survey. And I'm going to push quite hard for you to fill that in, because that's how we learn, that's how we do it better, and I'm going to be completely blunt, that's how we show funders that they should keep funding us to do this sort of stuff, and it does cost money. So I hope I haven't missed anything from the Norwich Friends of the Earth perspective. Okay, fantastic. In that case, I'll invite Asha Minns to join us, who's the Director of the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research, and importantly for us locally, Co-Chair of the Norwich Climate Commission. Asha, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. And you know, I wasn't invited to pull pints in a pub in Wiltshire, but this isn't bad either as a place to speak. So, as Ben said, I'm one of the directors of the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research, which is based here at the University of East Anglia, and we're 4 UK universities in total that make up the Tyndall Centre. But I'm also chair of the Norwich Climate Commission, co-chair of the Norwich Climate Commission. The other co-chair is the City Council, having started sort of end of last year, so I might talk a little bit more about that later, but we're 10 commissioners at the moment trying to guide, help, support the City Council and Norwich's citizens in both low carbon journey and adapting to climate change as well from a very place-based climate action perspective. So personally I've done quite a lot of the big international stuff, the United Nations and all that, and Sustainable Development Goals, and I seem to have found myself working quite locally because I think that's one of the places where change can be, and that's, I think, maybe why we're here today. I wasn't actually going to do slides, and I suspect this might be a bit of a slow machine. Do people put your hands up if you prefer slides? Okay, well, that's not helpful, is it? It's about half and half. So let's persist with slides. We'll do something visual. So I'm talking about climate risk, but I'm also talking about climate risk with a bit of a sort of biodiversity twist to it as well, about what we understand about Norwich. Okay, I'll take it back. It's quite a fast computer. So just what it is that we understand about climate risk in Norwich, and I have the privilege, actually. It's a very exciting project, although it's only 2 years long, whereby we will be because I was hoping to be a bit further on with the project now, but sometimes that's how it is with modelling and supercomputers and the like, really scaling down to look at what climate risk is for Norwich, so what it is that Norwich has to adapt to. And I have a dream of doing this for every UK local authority, so that every UK local authority can really see what they're doing. So I'm presenting this work, which of course isn't my work, it's the work of hundreds of people and many, many computers and cleverer people than me. So I'm going to talk a bit about biodiversity and so pollinators. So everybody knows why pollinators are really important. Yeah, I don't think I have to go right back to that, but we completely rely on pollinators. And what I'm talking here is about where to take care of. So if we're going to have nature conservation, where are the best places to protect? And not surprisingly, if we look down to Thetford Forest or the Broads, at 1.5 degrees, pollinators do fairly well, so sort of going up towards the greener colours, towards 100% that you can see up there. So pollinators at 1.5 degrees, and I'm really not going to get into a discussion, but let's just take it we're at 1.5 degrees, yeah? Let's just take it there. So at the moment, we're all right for pollinators in our main conservation areas. Is that going to change? 2 degrees, so 0.5 degree warmer than now. You can see that it's going from the dark colours to the lighter colours, so we're beginning to lose the pollinators, and we're seeing how important pollinators, we know how important pollinators are to everything. And then we get to 3 degrees, 3.2 degrees, and there aren't very many pollinators left, really. So that is major, major impacts on kind of anything to do with biodiversity, anything to do with nature, anything to do with nature-based services. Nevertheless, that does tell us, and we could layer all sorts of species on there. I've just gone sort of pollinators as a big kind of group of organisms and insects. We could look down at the species levels on a lot of this work. But these are the areas that the real attention has to be paid to, is the Broads, is Thetford Forest, and those green areas, because those are the refuges, those are the arcs where pollinators and therefore loads of other biodiversity can persist into the future. Pollinators are also useful beyond just sort of biodiversity for the sake of having species richness. So wheat beyond biodiversity, and a very similar scheme as I was showing before. So when it's dark, you've got more tons of wheat per hectare, and when it gets light, you've got less tons of wheat per hectare. So let's not worry about 2080, that's so far into the future. But 2050, I just heard a child, so there are some people here who will be eating wheat in 2050, or that this is relevant to. So we go from roughly sort of 14 tonnes to 16 tonnes per hectare at the moment, down to 2050 under a high climate change projection. So that's more like the one that was taking us to 3.2 before. And we're getting down to sort of 2 to 4 tonnes of wheat per hectare. So that's a huge loss. And in there is both heat and drought. So it's the effects of those on heat, and of course we'll be looking at that a little bit this summer, because we just kind of lived through heat and drought on the crops this summer, and those of you who've been driving around the county a little bit, as I was, could see quite a lot of crops just sort of not making it and failing. So that's where we are with wheat, sort of beyond biodiversity. Talking about not enough water, heat waves, droughts. The other end of the extreme, storm surges. So storm surges are water, seawater, coming up from the North Sea, up the Yare, the Thurn, down the Waveney, up towards Norwich. And this is showing something similar. So 1990 shows that the model's right. You know, it's doing a good job of projecting. 230, you can see that the water sort of gets further up and spreads more, and 2070 out into the future it gets further up. It doesn't particularly get further up in the direction of Norwich. It goes sort of down the Waveney. It also backs up much more behind Great Yarmouth. So you can see Great Yarmouth is sort of almost cut off there, sort of Great Yarmouth and Filby. So again, these are the places to look at, but to be a little bit positive about it. So the highest surge was in December 2013. It was just over 3 metres. And everybody was very well protected against that, not only the sea defences, but the Environment Agency, the councils, everybody working together to really make sure all the barriers were shut, to make sure that people were protected. So it kind of worked for now, but what we've got is more of this coming into the future. And right now, over the past 12 months, there's been 150 days where the tide level at Great Yarmouth has been higher than what it is supposed to be looking at the average. And right now, if you happen to be interested in fishing and looking at the local fishing Facebook posts, you'll see there's a massive salt surge that's killed hundreds of thousands of fish right now, less in the Yare, but in the Waveney, in the Thurne, these other rivers that are sort of closer to the sea. So we're going to see a bit more of that, and the data right now even shows that that's happening. So this isn't some supercomputer telling us out into the future. This is a here and now. And very quickly, heat stress. That shape is Norwich City Council. This is looking a little bit more at what I'm hoping to do is clip down to local authority areas. For every heat mortality goes up 2.5 degrees for every 1 C in Norwich, increase in temperature. Again, we'll have just seen some heat mortality, not only in Norwich, but across the UK this summer. Well known that heat waves caused mortality to people under heat, already vulnerable people, and the heat stress kind of lays on an extra thing there. But heat is only not about mortality, there's also economic impacts, loss of jobs, loss of productivity, so we're looking at that. And retrofitting of properties, so insulating properties, which is more important now than it's ever been before, also protects people about heat stress. It's not only about winter, it's about the summer as well. And then just quickly for the Norwich, I was going to talk to the slides, but I'm going to talk into the slides. Norwich Climate Commission, of which I'm co-chair, and I sort of said roughly what we're doing. So when we set off in March, I surveyed about 30 people, kind of key Norwich City or related people that are climate people, not at all scientists actually, just sort of wider climate stakeholders, as to what they thought some of the priorities for what the Norwich Climate Commission should be doing. I haven't put them all in here, it was a big long survey, but mostly they just said developing a positive vision in the communication. So what should we be doing in our communication? Developing a positive vision, providing information about climate change, highlighting positive stories. So I thought that was a tricky one for me, because I just came and told you how bad stuff's going to be, and mortality and impacts and all the rest of it. But the positive vision thing is very, very relevant as well. But we need to understand the risks in order to know what it is we're developing a positive vision about, and also to tell the truth. We're not trying to bright side and pretend that things are going to be better than they are. And then for the target audiences, which great for an event like this. So the people thought, well, the Norwich citizens should be the key target audience, priority 1, then the businesses, city councillors, youth, and then voluntary and community groups. So I think that touches a little bit on some of the people here and the people that are involved with this as well. And trying to go to a little bit more of the positive vision, some of you will be aware, certainly local people, there's 50 hectares going spare in East Norwich, and it's as far as I know, it's the biggest development in England and Wales, any urban development. So this is somewhere that, with proper support, funding, focusing of minds, ambition, positive vision, could be something really, really exemplar. It's going to take decades to develop that. And so what has to happen, every property right now is obsolete before the keys have been handed over. So this has to be obsolete maybe in 30 years' time, not obsolete before anybody's even moved in. So that's somewhere that I would like citizens of Norwich, community groups, councillors, everybody to really focus, and this is how the present should be to be proofed into the future. And I just show that because that's the development, and as we know, it's right by the river, so it's quite clearly on a floodplain now. Remember all that storm surge stuff I showed? So it will, if it wasn't for the protections now, it would be flooded. It will definitely be more flooded into the future, but that can all be worked with and adapted to and understanding those risks. So I think that was it, but I just wanted to sort of finish off with another sort of positive vision, talking about what it is that can be done and what it can be done by all of us, is it's making space for nature. So I talked about the pollinators and the important places to look after, and nature has to have somewhere to move and somewhere to grow to as the climate changes. Similarly, I talked about the sea surge flooding. That's just the stuff coming up the river. That's not the water coming down the river. Things like East Norwich development. If you're developing, you now have to have net gain in biodiversity. You have to have a biodiversity advantage somewhere else. So making space for nature, thinking about where nature can go, where species can move to, where habitats can go to as the climate changes now, all those fish in the rivers, and into the future, is key to something that we can all do. And I think some of the other speakers are going to talk about this much better than I am, whether that be, in my case, my postage stamp sized little lawn in a typical sort of Norwich single brick, terribly insulated Norwich City house, or people or farmers or landowners or conservation groups. We all need to make space for nature so that it can change into the future. That's it for me. Take some questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, chance for any questions or comments, thoughts really. I think we'd all love to go away from here today feeling energised, so let's all help each other to do that. So gentleman here and then a lady over there. There's a microphone just coming.
Yeah.
Can you outline what you've achieved in that time from now, as well as your survey, which you mentioned, and what you want to achieve in the next 12 months?
Well,
just repeat the question.
Yes, certainly. So that was a question about the Norwich Climate Commission. Began about October last year. It's probably about beginning of this year that we got going for sure. And then, and what is it we've achieved in that time and what our objectives are. So in terms of achieved in that time, I think we've done a lot of engagement. We've definitely started work on the things that we want to do. So the 22nd of October, which is a Saturday at the Arts Centre, Norwich Arts Centre, we have a 2-hour meeting, a workshop for community organisations around energy, around community energy, it's a bit of an unconference with a fairly open agenda, basically, so that the community groups can tell us what it is they want, what it is that they want us to do and what they want us to help. So that's an initial one. And actually, there's something that I wouldn't talk about honestly. I've had some students doing some really good projects on the climate impacts on Norfolk, another one around fuel poverty, or another one around place-based climate action network. So we've got quite a lot of evidence base as well. And the things I wouldn't talk about here actually is having the right conversations with the right people, so quite political discussions to heighten ambition, to support the City Council and others and the journey that they want to be on, but they're not necessarily quite sure how to get there or what the most important trade-off is as well. In the new year, because we're 10 commissioners at the moment and I've just sort of been consolidating, like a core group, we will be expanding out and recruiting more commissioners because we've actually got more work that we can deal with right now, which will be going back out initially to people who already applied to be commissioners and then maybe expanding out from that. So maybe watch that space if you're interested in commission. And we're everybody, by the way. We're not just like scientists from up at the university. We're people from arts backgrounds. We've got musicians. We've got people from community groups. We've got people from faith-based organisations. We've also got technical people as well. So the idea is that it's a broad church, so that we can try and sort of cover as much as we can. And I know one sector we're underrepresented in right now is transport. So in particular, we would quite like some transport commissioners. The problem with transport is transport consultants, of course, get paid loads of money. So why would they want to volunteer themselves to come be a commissioner? But nevertheless, we could do some transport.
Can you hear me? Yes. Oh, good. I don't want to stand. Sabina Varani from Green New Deal Norwich. And I'm part of a group of organizations now. We've got Goodery on board and the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development. And we are putting together, well, we are a steering group that's putting in an application to become a member of Sustainable Food Places. That application goes in March. Our vision for our work is very much around regenerative practices in food that can rebuild spaces, habitats for biodiversity, that address climate change, that address loss of soil, that address the soil sponge, which helps reduce the threat of flood. It increases our ability to cope with drought, etc. So when you talk about positive stories, I would love to see a positive story told about food. We also, we're looking at the possibility that you could grow, urban areas can grow something like 30% of their food needs within the urban footprint. If we can do that, and then we can also work with farmers around Norfolk and near Norwich to develop shorter links in trade between those who grow and those who eat the food. There's all kinds of positive things that could come out of this work. And I'd really love to see some of that work being represented in what the Climate Commission is doing. And I'm delighted that the leader of the Norwich City Council is here today. He's been in conversation with me about the work that we're doing. We're looking for other partners to extend our steering group with, where there's a clear alignment of purpose. And so if you think your group might be interested, please do come talk to me. And I'd love to hear anything you have to say about this, Asher.
Thank you, thank you. There's a lady here with a question, just maybe she's, yeah, I didn't know she was hidden behind the pole there to see it.
Eileen Battinger, very concerned citizen of Norwich. I think I have a very simplistic question. It's pollinators. Key, you said, words that affect. In our area, we have certain pollinators who are used to our climate. Are there in other parts of the world different pollinators from perhaps more similar climates to the one we might have in decades that will come, or we could encourage, or we need to perhaps pollinate different crops in the future? Is there anything in that?
There might be some better entomologists than me to answer that in detail, but for sure. And farmers have been, well, all species, us included, are actually, they sit within a climate envelope, which is the conditions that best suits that species, and that might be some particular insects. That's all organisms, really, plants as well. And so those different pollinators sit within those different climate envelopes, and basically the researchers kind of work out what the climate envelope is, the conditions are for that particular one. So one that we look at here quite a lot, of course, is the, what's it called? What's the Broad's butterfly? The swallowtail, yeah, exactly. So that's one that's endemic to here, so that's quite sort of well understood. But farmers for forever have brought in other species, other pollinators, there's different types of bees to kind of to take up those jobs. One of the things often happens when you introduce species from somewhere else is they have an unintended consequence, like they end up eating the thing that you actually wanted to protect to begin with. Australia's full of that. So you get the unintended consequences, and so mostly it's better to go with what you've got because they've evolved over generations and generations and generations to be in their current climate envelope. But one of the things that is probably not really understood very well is the speed of change. So it's to do with how fast the climate changes as to how fast organisms, pollinators can evolve to keep up with that. But also, it's not just about this sort of slow or perhaps fast change of climate, it's all about the extremes as well. It's the extreme weather, like the heat waves or the droughts or the floods. Those are the things that have the biggest impact. So it's being adapted to the extremes, not only the sort of the background climate. Does that help? Yes. Okay. Any entomologists you may, if there's some people who are better on insects than me, then please. Okay.
Did you want to respond to Sabrina at all as well?
I thought it was more of a comment than a question, actually. I didn't quite get the question in there.
It wasn't so much a question, just feedback. Yeah, I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were on what I said and potential for food having an impact.
Yeah, the potential, I mean, taking it out for food specifically, the potential for food, the potential for everything is massive, but I think it's what can be changed and what can't be changed, because so much of it, like with climate, like with energy, people having energy poverty right now, that's not to do with their purchasing decisions, that's to do with the big infrastructure that already exists and is out there. And so probably personally, it's not my area at all, that's a little bit how I think about food, and I think it depends on what the time horizons are as well. So I would just have a lot more to learn around food. Where I live, what is it, there's now 8 Aldis, is it, in Norwich? That's where people get their food from. So there's a lot of change to make, or 8 Aldis and Lidls, there's a huge change to be made before that comes into people's lives. So I mostly just have questions to ask around what the transition can be in the time frames that I'm sort of looking at. And some of us older here, they've been working climate for quite a long time. This is coming down the pipeline much quicker than anything that we thought it would be when we started at the beginning of our careers. And so also it's how quickly those changes can be made. But there's always a need for better food. Clearly, taking care of soils is all about the soils, and making that freely available to everybody. I think there's actually a justice thing in there. It's not only the people who go to the organic shop and have that sort of money. It should be for everybody shopping in the cheap supermarkets as well. And if not, there's a problem otherwise, if it's just for a particular subset.
Well, we're certainly not looking at it as a particular subset. Certainly not those who are really well off. This is very much about justice, social justice, economic justice, and environmental justice. That is at the core of what we're doing. We're very concerned about people who are in food poverty already and have been for a long time, as well as the numbers of people who are entering into food poverty. And of course, we've all seen, the Victory Gardens, we all know about that. We may not have all seen it ourselves, but we all know about the Victory Gardens and how much change can happen in a very short period of time when people recognize the importance and see the urgency. So what we're hoping to do, of course, is to get some of the larger institutions on board as well to support some of this work. We're looking very much at systems change, because it's not just that, it's all fine that we can all go to Aldi and get inexpensive food right now. But when we look at the shocks to the food system around the world from climate change, the loss of crops, never mind wars, Ukraine, of course, what's going on there, the impacts on food security are growing. So the more food that we can provide for ourselves from within our region and our backyards, the safer everyone will be. There'll be presumably less social unrest as things get more difficult. And of course, there's also huge potential for cooling, particularly urban spaces. They're getting, you feel the heat extreme in an urban area much more. So growing trees and other greenery in urban spaces can also reduce sort of the threat of heat extremes, and it can help in the winter as well. And where those are edibles, there's just a lot of potential. And
Sure.
well, my group is Green New Deal
Can I
Norwich.
just check? Sorry to interrupt. Because of time, I just want to go to a couple of other questions.
Sure.
If
I'll
that's okay.
catch
I've
up
just
with
seen two, and I think the lady just behind was first, and then three more. So if we can keep the questions tight and the answers tight, and then we'll get through. Thanks.
Hello. I'm interested to hear from your perspective what a sustainable urban development in East Norwich might actually look like. Because I mean, we hear about these things all the time. We hear about it happening in, garden cities popping up all over the UK. And my heart just sinks, and I feel so much dread when we hear about all of this urban expansion and development. I mean, it's quite a big topic, but are there kind of a handful of wins that you think are actually realistic and that developers will listen to and take on board, and that will actually make these places sustainable?
So to start right at the beginning, so Norwich declared a climate emergency, the City Council, which means there's a pathway for net zero for Norwich, because it declared a climate emergency, and we've worked out what that decarbonisation pathway is. And of course, East Norwich blows that out of the water. You can't develop 50 hectares and reduce your emissions by kind of 50% by 2040 and do that as well. So those two things aren't compatible, but that's how it is. Therefore, East Norwich has to be developed as best as it can. So from the top of my head, and I've got some very clever people on the commission that aren't me, it's right by the River Wensum, so let's have a heat exchange into the river. Say there's going to be, and I'm making this number up, say there's going to be 5,000 flats there in the next 10 years. That's a completely made up number. That's not real at all. But current thinking would be, well, let's have 5,000 heat pumps then, because that would be net zero. That would be the efficient, environmentally thing to do. No heat pumps. Just get the heat out the river. And have the heat out the river with district heating. So not 5,000 heat pumps, but district heating, that everybody's sharing the heat, all the businesses, the flats, whatever is there. It's going to be a lot of rooftops. So let's have solar PV on all those rooftops. Let's have the developers kind of, this wouldn't work in real planning terms, but build south. Why can't most or half the roofs be south? Then you've just made a load of renewable energy there. Of course, insulated to very high standards, but there's also the adaptation. So it's already on a flood zone. That is not going to get better under any circumstances whatsoever. Flood management is brilliant. That's why Norwich is here, because flood management is brilliant and we're not wearing wellies. But at the same time, it can only cope with so much. So things like looking at those sorts of flood control, there's building properties with flood cellars is one way to get rid of water really quickly. Of course, building ones on stilts is another way to do it. Some places in the world, the ground floor of all properties right on the seawall is sort of tiled, and you can sweep it out. So it's not where you keep your food. No electrics, nothing that's going to go pop and sort of take out the entire neighbourhood because the water got in there. So there's lots of adaptation things that can be done as well. Obviously green spaces, obviously lots of trees to keep it cool because we know how hot it's going to be, etc., etc., etc. So, it's a lot of it's about raising ambition. And what I would like to see, and we haven't really got to the end of this story yet, but all city councils, but Norwich, because it's the one that I live, be bold enough to say to planners, don't come to us without planning permission if you're not doing district heating, if you're not doing renewables, if it's not flood protected. Otherwise, just don't bother. And it seems to us that, and this isn't a Norwich thing specifically, but city planners sometimes feel they're not as powerful as they actually are. And so in Cornwall, they're actually testing this. Cornwall County Council is testing this, that actually we're going to write our own building codes. and then the developers have to come to our own building codes, not the government minimum. British building codes are the minimum standard. It's supposed to be better. So rather than building to the minimum, build to the best, so that in 30 years' time, it becomes obsolete. Not it's obsolete because it's going to be built to standards now, and those are already obsolete. Is that all right?
Thank you. So I've just been told we do need to wrap up because we need a couple of minutes to get ready for the next speaker. So my apologies to those who put hands up towards the end. I don't know if you can... Great. Asher's going to hang about for a few minutes, so do grab him. Just give Asher a round of applause. Thank you very much for taking the time. And I think just, one positive note is we do have institutions like the Tyndall Research Centre based here in Norwich. There is a lot happening in the city and a lot more that needs to be done. So in a couple of minutes, we're going to hear from Esther Rose Warren. Is she here? Oh, you're Esther. Hi, Esther. Which I'm really looking forward to, about Norwich's amazing ancient trees. So we're just going to switch over. So if you just give us a few minutes, feel free to grab a quick cuppa at the back.
Should I just unplug it? I don't know if I'm going to need the password for this again.